China has entered its annual political season as the annual sessions of the top legislative body, the National People's Congress, and the top political advisory body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, are being held simultaneously in Beijing. According to China's constitution, the National People's Congress, or the NPC, is the highest organ of state power. It has a unique constitutional status compared with other legislative bodies around the world. To help you better understand the Chinese legal system, we'll start by going beyond China and try to compare different legal and constitutional traditions and systems of election. We have chosen three very distinct countries: China, which is trying to become a so-called great modern socialist country; the US, which prides itself on having the longest surviving constitution; and Russia, which transitioned from communism to a more Western-style democracy. Welcome to this special edition of The Point. I'm Li Xin. And in our first edition, we'll closely examine the three countries' constitutions. I'm pleased to be joined in our Beijing studio by John Milligan-Whyte, Chairman and CEO of White Daimin Investments Limited, and Charles Liu, founder of Hao Capital. In London, we have Alexander Nekrassov, a former Kremlin Adviser. And I would like to welcome all of you to this special edition of The Point. What kind of problem, what kind of challenges the American Constitution faced with at this moment? The biggest one?
In any country, if a small group of people manage to seize control and make all the rules to benefit them and not benefit the common people, eventually you have a revolution. In Russia, the disposable income, I've heard, went down 10% last year, and the GDP was minus 3.7, so it's in serious trouble. I totally agree with my learned Russian friend that the Americans should never have been going around the world saying, we know everything, copy us. China and Russia could never be and shouldn't be a copy of the United States. The problem we're having at the moment is that a small group of very wealthy people have gained control of government, and as my learned friend says, you can ignore the Constitution. It simply is window dressing. And the president will either be impeached or not re-elected and the country will recover, or he'll be not impeached and re-elected and the country will look more like Russia. We're very authoritarian. I agree with my learned friend that most people in the street don't know what's in the Constitution, but the basic idea is if you have an agreement that's in it, you can gradually over time try to live up to what it says.
Well, I guess Mr. Nekrassov will have something to say about that, but Charles, let's come back to China and talk about China a little bit. In terms of purpose, in terms of the importance of the Constitution to the Chinese legislative landscape, is there any difference between the Chinese system and the US?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The difference is massive. The US Constitution is very short, a couple hundred words, I think.
Yes.
It's very generalized. Even the Second Amendment talks about the right to bear arms. At that time, it was muskets. It was these very, very funny long things. Today, we're talking about automatic rifles. And then there are those who actually accept the two to be the same. So it is, you have a constitution which is very, very general. And this is probably why it was able to last over the ages, because you can interpret it in many ways, depending on whoever is sitting on the Supreme Court or what the president would like to say. But in China's case, it's quite complicated. Number one, the population is massive. Number two, you can have a Cantonese reading of the Constitution and a Shanghainese reading of the Constitution. You might even get some differences because it is so large, diverse, and complex. And this is why the Chinese Constitution is, I think, 50 times more in terms of number of words compared to the US Constitution, because many things have to be laid out. You have to lay it out to hundreds of millions of people who are just coming off the farmland. In fact, many of them have only become literate in the last generation.
Right.
So there's no culture, no history, no education. So it is important for the Chinese constitution to be very, very precise and detailed, not only to reflect changes in the circumstances, but also to reflect the direction in which the top strategic forces of the leadership are aiming at.
Do you see the Constitution playing a very important role in help maintaining the stability which is vital for China's development?
I think absolutely. In terms of stability, the reason, for example, the anti-corruption campaign was launched with brute force, with iron fist, was because it was beginning to create instability. And now this is permanently enclosed in the Constitution through the Supervisory Commissions, which is now lifted out of the State Council and becoming independent. And no one from the government officialdom is allowed to participate in the supervisory side. So when you have the Communist Party, which is the leading party in China, that is running the elections and so on and so forth, you have to have a very strong supervisory role to watch over this. I think the Constitution is very, very important in terms of, for me, it serves three important purposes. Number one is to educate the masses as to what the rights are and what the government can and should provide. That's one. Two, officials have to look seriously at what's in the Constitution and be educated as to how to govern. Because, you know, many officials in China are still, shall we say, 30 feet from the land. You know, they're still farmers and peasants. And the third is to give a direction and guidance to where the country is strategically headed to maintain that stability.
Mr. Nekrassov, I understand the kind of importance to recognize the practical situation of the country instead of some rules written down on some papers that people don't really understand or can't really understand even if they want to. However, the rule of law, you need to have bases, you need to have something to abide by. How do you look at the kind of importance to really reinforce the Constitution, maybe to help the people understand it instead of saying, if you're not interested, then never mind, this is not your business anyway?
Well, I think it's a very difficult task to involve the people in running the country and understanding, the legal structure, because a lot of people simply don't want to know this. Their current, day-to-day problems, that is what is most important. And I totally disagree with the colleague in the studio who said about, the very rich running the country and the living standards in Russia collapsing and so on. This is not the case. First of all, let us look at the nature of what is going on in China and Russia and compare it to America. Where on earth in the West would you see top government officials prosecuted and going to prison for corruption? You won't see it in America. You won't see it in any Western country, only in China and Russia, where the very top government officials can be punished for corruption, where the top bankers, businessmen, go to prison or lose their wealth. Nothing like that happens in America, ever. They had the biggest financial crash in 2008, and practically nobody, not one person, answered for it. So
well, they prosecuted a Chinese banker.
Exactly.
Yes, well, no, the point I'm making here is this. The Constitution is a good background for the regime in any country to operate in a sense that it has the structure, the skeleton of the of legality, right? So it can appeal, both the citizens and the government can appeal to this document. But the implementation of that document is a completely different matter. And that is why we can talk about, forever, how wonderful this constitution is, or this constitution, and so on and so on. It's the implementation of the natural law, as I call it,
right.
The implementation of justice, practical justice. And that is why for example, we can
but
debate,
Mr. Nekrassov,
who
do you
lives
think
better
in the
in what
case of
country.
Russia, the implementation of the Constitution is up to par with what you expect, what you think is an acceptable level?
I think there are many problems. I will accept that there are things that are not going right. And I think the beauty of Russian situation is that the government and the people accept and understand that. And we see, for example, the Russian press, which is bashed by Western politicians and Western media as being totally not free, and it can't write anything and report anything. The Russian press has developed in a way that the American press would envy. What is being reported in the Russian media will never be reported in the Western and American media as well, because they will not simply dare to attack top officials, the big businessmen and so on.
Right.
So we are developing in Russia. It is still a long way to go, but it is not ideal, but I think it's much better system for the future than the one in America.
Okay, thank you.
And the Chinese system, by the way, is progressing as well.
Right. We're going to talk about that if we have time. But John, any reaction to what Mr. Nekrassov said so far? He has made again a couple of points. Maybe the thing on top of your mind.
Well, I believe something happened to President Nixon, which was the result of a burglary. But the more important point is, my learned friend is absolutely right. A financial crisis occurred that affected the entire world. It shouldn't have occurred, it occurred. And absolutely nothing has been done to prevent another one occurring. In that respect, he's absolutely right. The American Constitution is not being implemented. That's the problem. That's the crisis that we're going to see worked out.
20 seconds, Charles. From watching the back and forth, what is to take away for China?
For China, it's unfortunate that we don't have 20 seconds. You can't really say very much. But the amendments which have been proffered to the Constitution this time are actually very strategic and very meaningful. The setup of the Supervisory Committee, the changing of the word in terms of governance, the rule of law, are very, very significant. I hope the Western press actually look at the substance and not the superficial aspects of the Constitution amendments.
And I think the Chinese government and the Chinese legislators are also working hard to make sure that the Constitution is better implemented, so it's not just a piece of paper. Many thanks to my three guests actually. John Milligan-Whyte, Chairman and CEO of Whyte Daimin Investments Limited; Charles Liu, founder of Hao Capital; and from London, Alexander Nekrassov, a former Kremlin advisor. China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, adopted a landmark amendment to the country's constitution on Sunday. The amendment made a series of major institutional designs, including the establishment of supervisory commissions aiming to ensure a check on the limits of power, among other changes. What are the significance of these changes? What would it mean for the Chinese nation and people as China enters a decisive phase in its efforts to revitalize itself? To find answers to these and other important questions affecting the country's future, I earlier spoke to Professor Zhang Weiwei, Director of the China Center at Fudan University, for his personal views. Our conversation started on the establishment of supervisory commissions. They are listed as a new type of state organ in the Constitution, together with administrative, judicial and procuratorial organs of the state. I asked him about what problems these commissions will be addressing.
Is the state institution against corruption. As we all know, the party has central disciplinary commission. to discipline party members and party cadres. This has been going on for many years, especially in the past 5 years, that proved to be quite effective. And now this is extended to all the state functionaries, public servants. Essentially, it's a broad sense, say, university professors, professors of the public universities, doctors of public hospitals. All these will be supervised by this committee at different levels. So it's much larger in scale. This is the new institution.
In the Western system, will there be any equivalent that people can compare to?
It's very similar, to my mind, to this Hong Kong's institution called the Independent Commission Against Corruption. And pretty similar. I think China has drawn some inspiration from that particular institution based in Hong Kong.
Okay. Now, currently, supervision is the duty of the state, the council, and local governments at and above county level. So, what upgrades might the new commission bring to the current supervisory system?
From my knowledge, already it's having established at all the three levels: the county, the lowest county level, and municipality level, and the central level. So this is a new structure, which will be very useful in fighting corruption.
Finally, this might be a little bit technical on this aspect. Now, we know that in each of China's provincial level administrative units, be it a province or a municipality or autonomous region, there is the head of the party committee and there is the head of the provincial or autonomous regional People's Congress. Sometimes this can be the same person, and then you have the mayor or the governor of the city, and then you would also have the head of the Supervisory Commission. How can the head of the Supervisory Commission exercise oversight over the head of the corresponding party organization?
Actually, this is a major political reform China has carried out since Xi Jinping came to power. In the past, this Party Disciplinary Commission was under the local party committee.
Right.
Yeah. And since she came to power, he changed this structure so that, for instance, the chairman of the Party Disciplinary Commission will not be appointed by Shanghai Party Secretary, will be appointed by the Central Party Disciplinary Commission, by Beijing. See?
So in the future,
same with the state.
In the future, this will be by the Central Supervisory Commission
that's true.
from Beijing.
It's independent of local governments or local party institutions.
I see. The amended constitution will give Chinese cities the power to make local laws and regulations under the condition that the laws do not contradict with the constitution or relevant provincial laws and regulations, or the parties' or other laws and regulations. What kind of purpose is this kind of delegation of legislative power serving?
It's also a major step towards good governance or better governance. China is a huge country. I always say, it's the size of 100 average European states. So you have many municipalities, or what officially we call cities with districts. They are already very large, like Suzhou, for instance, or Wuxi in Jiangsu province. Each of them is larger than Switzerland in terms of population.
Right.
Now these cities are given right for legislations. They can produce their own local laws and regulations. Of course, they have to be compatible with national laws. They cannot be conflict with national laws. Yet, because China is a vast country, there are different local conditions in the specific requirement, say, to protect the environment, to protect cultural heritages. You can make really local local laws.
Well, right now, there are already over 10,000 local laws. So if the new system is put into place, how do you see the trend of the rise of numbers, and what kind of challenges legislator will be faced with?
China is a vast country. If, as I said, if Wuxi is larger than Switzerland, but now it does not have the power to issue local laws. Why not? With 8 million people, you should have this right. But it should be, location-oriented. This particular region or city-oriented to meet the demands and particular issues of that particular region. Right. So that will be fine. No
Allow
problem.
me to make this follow-up question. Will it create the kind of barriers as we are seeing sometimes in the United States, where the state has their laws, when the federal government has federal laws? Sometimes, the federal laws will have some kind of clashes with the state
But
laws.
the precondition of this whole revision is about the fact that under the condition these local laws cannot and should not be in conflict with national laws or even with provincial laws. So they are really serving the local needs, usually in the field of environmental protection, cultural heritage protection.
But given the kind of vast amount of work that is to be done, and this is the first time, right, people in the city will be undertaking, drafting their own laws, what kind of challenges do you think this is going to create? And also to make sure that these laws are constitutional.
No, this should be okay.
It should be okay.
What's good about China model is whatever you do, you already have this tested everywhere. At least 10 cases already being tested. They prove to be working. And you can use this kind of model extending elsewhere.
Right. But again, there is the question of constitutionality, right? And this is also one case in point, one issue that people are talking about, because this will be listed for the first time to advance constitutionality review, and it is said that we will strengthen oversight to ensure compliance with the Constitution and safeguard the authority of the Constitution. How is the process done right now?
Actually, perhaps China is really already a bit late in this regard, because in many countries you have a constitutional court, like in Germany, in many countries. So you can really bring a case which you think is a violation of constitution to the court, and the court will really pass a judgment. So China perhaps is moving in that direction. But I haven't followed the latest news, how it will evolve. Maybe after 2 sessions we'll know better. Essentially, perhaps first of all, under the People's Congress, we could have a committee which will examine, cases where accusations are made. This is against Constitution. Eventually, I think China should also move towards this direction.
What's in it for China to advance this kind of rule-based governance?
This is also a very important part of the rule of law, or what we call legal building. Constitution, of course, is the most important part of the law, and we try to make the Constitution more concrete, more meaningful, really for the life of ordinary people. So really, we can examine whether this or that violates Constitution or in line with the Constitution. So Constitution will be something tangible for every Chinese.
And people should also maybe be more aware of the Constitution. Is that also why it has been proposed that all officials will have to make an oath when they take an office of allegiance to the Constitution?
Don't underestimate this kind of procedures, formalities. Sometimes they really create a sense of seriousness, a kind of importance. It has certain added value. You make it more formal, more institutionalized, with the oath of allegiance, with the ceremony.
What else
helps.
What else is the Chinese government doing to help promote that kind of awareness of the Constitution?
I think we have a new Constitutional Day. On that particular day, people make a lot of efforts to publicize the Constitution.
Do you think these kind of activities have achieved some progress, some change?
It will, with these 2 sessions, you will see, because this Constitution become much more relevant for the daily life of the Chinese.
Yeah.
You will see this very closely.
Well, what kind of more responsibility, finally, will it be on the CPC to make sure that the Constitution is really put to practice? Because in the Constitution we have many clauses. For instance, the protection of the freedom of speech.
Definitely, this is a good way to really know, the real meaning of each every clause in the Constitution. If you look at the evolution of the Chinese Constitution, we have each time with new revision, you have something extremely important. For instance, socialist market economy. This was put into the Constitution in the revision. For instance, protection of private property. This is put into Constitution. For the freedom of speech is already contained there for since the very beginning. But it's in the context of like in other countries, you must abide by the law.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Professor Zhang Weiwei, who is Director of the China Institute of Fudan University. Amendments to the Chinese Constitution have indeed aroused much attention around the world, and I can understand the questions people have towards these important matters which have huge implications for China's future and possibly the future of the world. What needs to be said is that China has its unique circumstances which require China-specific solutions not rooted in Western mainstream theories. Every time mainstream Western elites used their theories or standards to predict about China, they have failed because they do not really understand the country. It may do them well if they would show a bit more interest in doing so. I hope China can continue to prove them wrong. That is all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.